The Red Bull second seat is a toxic place, with expectations set unbelievably high with the comparison to one of the greatest drivers of this century so far in Max Verstappen. Pierre Gasly, one of the most prodigious racers of the past few years, GP2 and Formula Renault 2.0 winner, struggled exceptionally in that seat. So it begs the question, why then would you give it to Alex Albon, a driver who has never won a championship in open wheel racing? I'm not going to go too into detail into Albon's youth career because, well, it's not too impressive. He stormed a bunch of karting championships, including the CIK FIA European Championship, before getting into open wheel racing in 2012. His first decent result was third in the Eurocup Formula Renault 2.0 series in 2014, and then he'd have to wait until the 2016 GP3 series to top that with a second place behind Charles Leclerc, which was his best result to this day. In 2018, he'd finished third in the F2 Championship behind George Russell and Lando Norris, and would quite luckily get his chance in F1. So to say Albon was lucky to get a chance in F1 is an understatement. In 2019, he was scheduled to race for the Nissan Edams team in Formula E. Now Albon was not in the Red Bull Junior team at this point. In fact, he was only in that team for a single year between 2012 and 2013, and so would not have at all been expecting a Toro Rosso seat. But there was a major reshuffle occurring at Red Bull, with Ricciardo announcing he was leaving for Renault, and Brendan Hartley deciding a career in endurance racing might well be better than a career perpetually spent in F1 top 10 crashes lists, through very little fault of his own, mind you. This meant a promotion for Pierre Gasly was due, and a duo of Toro Rosso seats were free for the taking. With the next batch on the Red Bull Junior production line all ready to fill up F3 for the 2019 season, there was very little choice for Toro Rosso to bring in that would benefit the Red Bull family in the long run. And so, after signing former driver Danny Kvyat back after a year off and getting rejected by Lando Norris, Toro Rosso would approach one Alex Albon. Now Albon would get a chance in F1 and a shot to prove himself as a capable driver at the top level of motorsport. So did he take it? Well, I'd say for a rookie driver who'd achieved very little at junior level, he performed pretty decently, especially against a more experienced and pretty quick teammate at that in Danny Kvyat. He wasn't quite as high up as Kvyat by the Belgian Grand Prix, but he wasn't far off, with 16 points to his name, whereas Kvyat, thanks to a brilliant podium at the chaotic German Grand Prix that year, was on 27 points. Aside from that freak result, it was pretty even between the two, and as such, thanks to an underperforming Pierre Gasly in the main Red Bull seat, Albon would get his chance in a top car for the second half of the season. This Red Bull car was probably the third best car on the grid for that season, with Mercedes being Mercedes and Ferrari thinking FI regulations were more guidelines. Max Verstappen was also doing Max Verstappen things and driving the wheels off the car. Not literally though, he'd have to wait until the 2021 Baku race for that. So what was expected of Albon? Well, he wasn't going to be beating Max very often, but as long as every race he got around 6th or above, he was doing a fine job. Well, for every race in the Red Bull in the 2019 season, Albon would finish between 4th and 6th. He was Mr. Consistent, except for one race, the Brazilian Grand Prix. On lap 70 of 71, Albon was sitting in a very strong second place, partially thanks to some brilliant driving and partially thanks to the likes of Bottas's car giving up and the two Ferraris getting a little too touchy with each other on the racetrack. Hamilton, who had just overtaken Gasly for 3rd place, was climbing up the rankings, and fast, and soon right on the back of Albon. Now the late great Ayrton Senna once said, "If you no longer go for a gap that exists, you are no longer a racing driver." This quote is only really applicable in certain circumstances, such as when you're alongside another racer and they've left the door open for you through the corner. Or maybe when you're wanting an overpriced shirt from a clothing brand that has been slowly dying for the past 10 years. I was stopped at some traffic lights the other day and the quote came to my head, hence why it's being mentioned right now. And when I was sitting there, I thought, I can safely say that this quote is not applicable right now. And neither was it applicable for what Hamilton was about to do next. Diving it down the inside of Albon at turn 10, Lewis would make contact with Albon's rear right and spin Albon out, costing him his first podium of his F1 career and sending him tumbling down the order to 12th place. Albon would of course hope that this was a minor setback and that he wouldn't run into any more issues when racing near the top. Little did he know, 2020 was going to be a lot worse for him, as it was for just about everyone else on the planet, apart from that Andrex puppy. Do you ever think how much that puppy made off a massive global pandemic? Yeah, not so innocent now, is he? Albon wasn't thinking about that though, although he may have had some momentum thrown off thanks to the 4 months extra break due to it. Albon was ready for a new season, and going into Austria, with the Ferraris realising that the rulebook is in fact there for a reason, Albon would be pretty confident of pushing for some podiums. He qualified for the first race in 5th. Alright, not bad at all, just a position away from where was really expected. But then would come the issues of people forgetting how to build a car after being out of a factory for a few months. Verstappen, Ricciardo, Stroll, both Haas cars, Russell and Raikkonen's cars would all kill themselves in some weird Austrian version of vehicular ritual suicide. Thanks to Raikkonen and Alfa Romeo seemingly experimenting with an on-the-go tyre change method which thankfully didn't seem to catch on, the safety car came out. At this point, Albon elected to pit onto soft tyres while the leading Mercedes stayed on hards. Albon was now in 3rd place and well on for a strong chase down. In less than a lap, he was on the back of 2nd place Hamilton and attempted an overtake around the outside of turn 3. He made it round, but Hamilton was, in the words of Albon, a sore loser and clipped Albon's rear right. Again, pushing him off the track. Again, and out of a podium. Yet again. This time though, the overwhelming odds were that he'd push on for his first win of the season, and with the Red Bull usually a strong performer on the track that is named after them, who would have thought that one through, and him being on soft tyres versus the Mercedes hards. After the trip through the gravel, Albon's car decided to give up as well, and what could have been a first win of many crumbled to nothing, and most likely, along with Brazil 2019, was the catalyst for the season to come. The next 2 races, a second at Austria and then one at Hungary, Albon would qualify quite poorly, but he would make up a lot in the race, with a 7th to 4th climb in Austria and a 13th to 5th climb in Hungary. He still showed a lot of skill here in the races, but his qualifying had let him down, and that was hard to fix. It would let him down again for the British Grand Prix, but while climbing up in the race, Albon would pull a Hamilton at Brazil on Magnussen, spinning him off into the gravel and receiving a 5-second time penalty. Despite this, he'd still finish in 8th, mainly thanks to Pirelli making tyres so poor, we are glad they don't make contraceptives. This was the first of his real poor performances, and the first of many reasons he lost that Red Bull seat. For the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, Albon would again qualify low, this time in 9th, and again climb through the field and get back to 5th place in the race. Then, for the Spanish Grand Prix, Albon would start in 6th, an improvement, but get given a very weird alternate strategy call to be the only racer to pit onto hards very early and get stuck in traffic. This didn't even work out, as it ended up being a 2-stop in the end anyway, and due to it he finished down in 8th. Another poor race, but more down to strategy gamble than anything else. In Belgium, Albon would qualify 5th and finish 6th, and there was not much to report on in this race, apart from the fact that the Renaults were really sharp and made it quite awkward for Albon. But next was Monza, and it was over before it really started for Albon. Qualifying in 9th, he caught Gasly in the first corner and ended up with major floor damage, which killed any chance of his car getting anywhere near the top of this crazy race. Gasly of course went on to win in the newly renamed AlphaTauri, and it was the first time people really went, maybe the second Red Bull seat is the problem, not just the drivers. After Monza it was Tuscany, and finally a good qualification for Albon, qualifying in 4th, right behind Verstappen. Albon would show what he could do when qualifying strongly. After Verstappen went off in the first lap, Albon was able to get his first podium of his F1 career. With this, could he get his season back on track? Well, no. A poor qualifying in Russia, combined with a gearbox penalty, meant Albon was starting in 15th, which, at Sochi, was always going to mean a tricky race. He did manage to climb back up to 10th, but it wasn't nearly good enough. On the plus side, we did get the streaming lads battle between Albon, Russell and Lando though, so it wasn't all bad. What was bad though was the Eiffel Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. Albon would respectably qualify in 5th place, and surely with his solid racecraft he could push on. Well, no. After an early stop, Albon would be battling Kvyat on an alternate strategy, and after making the overtake would cut across and take off Kvyat's front wing, getting a 5-second time penalty for his troubles. Not that that would matter though, as just a few laps later he would go on to retire from the race with a damaged radiator. Yeah, this was not to be for him, and I guess we move on to Portugal. Albon would qualify in 6th, again a little lower than where he'd want to be, but he was improving. In the race though, he dropped like a stone early on. The Red Bull did not seem happy at the start, as Max was dropping too, though he managed to recover a lot better. Albon was stuck back around 8th to 12th position for the majority of the race, and, to compound another miserable afternoon, was lapped by his teammate Verstappen. This was turning into a run of poor form right when he didn't need it. It seemed the pressure was getting to Albon now. Back to Italy for a 3rd race, and this time at Imola. Albon would qualify 6th again, but could he finally turn that into a race result? Well, until the end of a safety car on lap 58, he was running up in 5th. Not the worst result at all. After that though, he was on old hard tyres and the pack behind him were on fresher softs for the last 5 laps. He was absolutely swallowed up by the midfield, and then, to really top off this run of bad form, he spun it coming out of the Villeneuve chicane. He would bring the car home for a 15th place, right at the back, and it was around this time when the media were talking a lot. Decisions were being made, and I think you can really tell that with how he was racing here. But there were still 4 races left of the season, and whether the decision to replace him had fully been made by this point, I'm not sure, but there was a bit of a turnaround from here. At Turkey, Albon would qualify in 4th, but the Red Bulls were a lot weaker in the wet weather on the ice rink surface that was the newly laid track in Istanbul. Despite this, Albon was running quite well in 3rd behind the 2 racing points for a long while, before taking a bit of a spin coming out of turn 4. Albon would end up finishing the race in 7th, again not as high as it could have been, but he was only a second off his teammate in Verstappen, and that is a lot better than it has been in the past few races. Next was Bahrain, and Albon would again qualify well, for a 2nd race in a row in 4th place. The race started and, as we all know, Grosjean survived probably one of the biggest crashes of this century in F1 in what can only be described as a proper real-life miracle. The race would restart after over an hour of red flag time, with Albon starting back in 5th this time. Bottas would get a puncture under a safety car and Albon would be back up to 4th quickly. Skipping over to lap 54, and Perez, who was sitting in 3rd just ahead of Albon, would have a spectacular engine failure, putting him out of the race and leaving a nice little bit of podium room for Albon to come through under the safety car and take, getting his 2nd podium of the season and his career to date. Next was back to Bahrain for week 2, and a bad qualification for Albon, down in 12th. But following the likes of Verstappen and Leclerc's DNFs, Mercedes' pit stop mess, and Russell's puncture, as well as some good Albon driving, I will give him that, he would end the race up in 6th place. A good recovery drive, but another race where he really should have been challenging at the top. And if his fate wasn't already sorted out, with Perez winning in Sakir, it was now. So, his final race in F1, Abu Dhabi, always a boring circuit. He qualified in 5th and finished up in 4th place. He kept pace with the leading trio but was unable to overtake any of them. And as such, Albon's season would wrap up, as would his seat at Red Bull. Now, do I think he should have lost the Red Bull seat? Well, I don't think he should have got it in the first place, to be honest, but that might be the Gasly fan in me. But after the showing in 2019, I thought I was proven wrong. I thought Albon deserved that seat and had shown it. In the end though, after the 2020 season is all done, and now I've looked over it and rewatched it and seen how Albon raced throughout the year, I do think that replacing him with Perez was a good call. But it's what they didn't do with him that was the wrong call. With Tsunoda entering into F1 after just 1 year of F2 and showing performances evident of being rushed very quickly upwards, I think the fact that Albon didn't get the same chances that Gasly got to revitalise his career in what is now a decent midfield team is wrong. I think Albon showed a lot of ability in races, but as a relative rookie to the sport, and we do have to remember that he has only been there for 2 seasons at the end of the 2020 season, he wasn't used to the pressure that came with the seat. Another weakness of Albon's that hurt him in the races was the fact that his tyres were dead so quickly compared to the other frontrunners, meaning he had to pit very early and as such would get caught in the traffic of the alternate strategy racers near the back for longer. Whether this was an issue with how the second Red Bull car was set up, or just an issue with Albon in general, it definitely hurt him. And the lesser pressure that the AlphaTauri has given Gasly has allowed him to really shine. And considering Albon was performing better than Gasly in that 2019 Red Bull car, it may well have done the same for Albon as well. I really do hope he gets a seat back in the F1 grid. He's a lovely guy and he seems like a pretty solid racer at that. And I would like him to at least be able to prove himself next to someone other than Max Verstappen. In his DTM venture, he seems to be really growing into that season as well, with a win at the most recent event at the Nürburgring, and he still seems loved as a development driver for Red Bull. So what do you guys think? Where do you think Albon will be in the future? Do you think he has a chance back in F1? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you guys so much for watching. Goodbye.